It's great to see you all here today on this Tuesday. I want to start, first of all, by thanking Dean Elizabeth Davis for sponsoring this speaker series, as well as the Net Impact Club. Where are our Net Impact Club members? Ooh, just fresh off the conference that happened last week in Seattle. So we're actually doing this in 3 parts. We have 3 speaker series coming up in rapid succession. So, of course, we have Teresa Pahl with us today. A week from today, Kirsten Toby, who's one of the co-founders of Revolution Foods, is going to be with us. She's also an Ashoka Fellow, Aspen Institute Fellow, and really well regarded in the field of social enterprise. They're a C-CORP that's B-Lab certified, that is raised $100 million in private equity, and also is at a similar run rate for their business. So a really up and coming now 10-year-old social enterprise, Revolution Foods, moving more and more into the consumer market. That's going to be followed. We're going to take a week off for Thanksgiving, and then on December 1st, we're going to come back with the really the co-founder and CEO of Fair Trade USA. Paul Rice also has been named 5 times by Fast Company as a social entrepreneur of note. He's been an Ashoka Fellow. He's also a well-regarded, so he is going to be speaking as well on how we activate consumerism in our purchases right ahead of the holiday season. And if you're interested in more background on those companies, I just wrote 2 cases on that that's distributed through Harvard Publishing. And also Fair Trade USA will be featured in November's issue of California Management Review. So feel free to check those out. But without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce Teresa Pahl. I've had the pleasure of knowing Teresa, I would guess now, for about 6 years. She has, for 13 years, managed the business practice of Hanson Bridgett. She's no longer doing that. She's a Berkeley alum. She's a JD alum from University of San Francisco. Woo! And she also has sat on numerous boards. So she sat on my board when I was running the Global Social Venture Competition at UC Berkeley. She's been involved in quite a few organizations and currently sits on the boards of Pacific Community Ventures and Social Venture Network. So she's actually very engaged with the entrepreneurial community, the social entrepreneurial community at large. And she's here today to talk about the role of the corporation. I know for those of you that are in my ethics class, we've been having a lot of interesting discussions on the role of the corporation. How much latitude does the corporation have in looking at maximizing not only shareholder value, but also stakeholder value? And I thought of no one better to handle this topic for us than Teresa. Teresa's going to speak for approximately 20 minutes, and then I've got a couple of questions to start, but we're certainly going to open it up to the audience. And so start thinking of what questions you might want to ask. I know many of you in my class have had a few questions you've been debating for some time that you might want to ask the expert here today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Teresa.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to see you all had lunch, because that means you'll be a much friendlier audience than if you were hungry and grumpy. So that's great. CSR is as you all know, because you've been studying this, is a big topic. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the trends that we're seeing, how companies are implementing, where we think this is going to be going in the future, and a little bit about why. I'm also going to focus a bit on the corporate entities that are used and why, as well as the B certification, and then do some case studies so you can see if this is really a growing trend or if this is a passing fad. And there have been arguments on both sides of that. Of course, you know which one I'm on the side of. So CSR is really has a vision of promoting corporate accountability to a wide range of stakeholders and not just the shareholders. And it's really underpinned by the belief that corporations can no longer act as a isolated economic entity without taking the broader view of society around them. And there's a couple, well, there's probably more than a couple, there's a lot of definitions of CSR. And one is by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is the continuing commitment by business to behave ethically and contribute to economic development while improving quality of life of the workforce and their families, as well as the local community and society at large, which seems to grab everything. However, my personal favorite is the following, which is CSR is that the community is not just another stakeholder in our business, but the very purpose of our existence. And I think that sums it up as to where the trend is going. So across the world, we've got attitudes that are rapidly changing. The social sector organizations, the nonprofits, are becoming more business-like. I know that I sit on the board of a couple nonprofits, and we're all looking towards creating a revenue stream or thinking about how we can be more business-like, at least to ensure our existence in the future. And we have more businesses that are looking to deliver impact, so looking more like nonprofits in some ways. A number of countries have already created a legal mechanism by which social enterprises can survive and exist and flourish. And that is more the traditional model where we have for-profit companies making money by commercial activity and then using that money to promote a social mission. A growing number of for-profits are growing more social and creating a positive impact through their businesses. And what is really nice to see is that we've got investors that are jumping on the bandwagon, and we'll talk a little bit about some successful fundraising activities as well as the attitude from the VC community towards these types of companies, which is critical, obviously, to scale impact. You need financing. And entrepreneurs create this new style of business, profit with purpose businesses. And most of my discussion will be focused on those types of businesses. And so we've got the traditional, I'll say, social enterprise business, where you have a company that wants to do well, do good, and what they do is they sell a product. They then take the money from that and they contribute it either by partnering with nonprofits or encouraging activities that promote a social impact. Whereas a profit with purpose business is one where the business derives profit and generates profit from their impact, from creating a social impact. And when I use the term social, I'm also referring to environmental. And when I talk about businesses, I'm including all types of forms of organizations. So limited liability companies, LLPs, all of those. One way to look at this is that Chevron, for example, I don't think most of you think of that as a B-Corp, but they think of themselves as having a strong social mission, and they take profits and they're doing environmental good. But that isn't the same as the profit with purpose business that we're more focused on right now. So in the 20th century, we saw shareholder corporations. And those corporations had a mission of maximizing shareholder value. And I know that you've been doing some reading in your classes, and I'm sure you're aware of how that's evolved over the years. The 21st century, we're moving towards, we'll call them stakeholder corporations, where it's a combination of creating social and shareholder value. Right now, there's 60 million conscious consumers, and that is successfully driving this trend. So the trends that we see right now, CSR programs are going global, and they are developing more flexibility for local adoption. For instance, a good CSR policy would not be to bring STEM education into an area that has no access to drinking water. So companies are not saying we need an across-the-board CSR strategy, but how can we tailor our CSR strategy for the locations in which we are doing business? The lines between for-profits and nonprofits are continuing to blur. Traditionally, you would see a for-profit company partnering with a nonprofit company to create a social good. And now we're seeing for-profits partnering with other for-profits or mission-driven companies. And even in the case of, for instance, LinkedIn, they give grants to their employees who have transformative ideas. So there's a for-profit partnering with its employees. And that trend we're starting to see continue to grow as well. A growing number of startups are adopting CSR reporting at very early stages. We see companies, when they come to us to initially form, they're immediately wanting to establish themselves as a mission-driven impact company and express that purpose and distinguish themselves from companies that are not focused. They also have come to believe, and I agree, that this allows for greater employee engagement, and as a result, it helps them. This is seen frequently as a leverage point in the talent war, as we all know. Now, I know that you guys are probably going to be out looking for jobs, and you'll have your questions as to whether or not there's really a talent war going on. So I have a son that's looking for a job right now, and he doesn't think that there's more jobs than people out there right now. But anyway, it is true. So materiality will also rise to the front and center of CSR reporting. Singapore Exchange is now requiring sustainability reporting, and you probably are aware that the EU has now adopted a new law where companies will have to begin reporting on their CSR strategies beginning in 2017. So they'll finish their 2016 year, and their annual reports will be required to include this new CSR reporting. So it's very likely that this area is going to continue to grow, that we're going to see more and more reporting, CSR reporting continuing to grow, and measuring the materiality of those programs. And what's really nice is we see a lot of nonprofits and for-profit companies that are developing talents and expertise that they're devoting to a social mission. IBM's Watson is being used to help with cancer research. Palantir is using philanthropy engineering to tackle really big issues like human trafficking. So it's sort of an all-encompassing, broad spectrum of ways that companies are turning to create a CSR strategy. So some of the tools that companies use to implement CSR, one of the first things that companies do, and one of the first things they're thinking about, is how am I going to distinguish myself from the companies that are not focused on a mission or creating impact. And they like to start with their choice of their entity, which is now something that they can do, which wasn't when I started practicing a few years ago. The most common forms are benefit corporations. And a benefit corporation is an actual corporate form that has a higher level of transparency, accountability, and purpose. You contrast this against a B-CORP, which is a certification, and that's given by the nonprofit B Labs. So there's corporate form versus, I'll call it a B certification, like a stamp of, good seal of approval. Some of the distinctions between the certification for a B Corp versus a benefit corporation. So the B Corp is, again, as I mentioned, a certification. It's given by B Lab, and it looks at the company's operations as a whole. And it requires the company to fill out a questionnaire. It's very detailed. Takes a long time since I've done it for our firm. I know what it's like. And they score you. And if you score at a certain level, you're eligible for participation as a B Corp. Any for-profit company in any country can seek this certification. There is a membership dues that you pay, and it's a sliding scale based on the size of your company, or the revenues of your company. Whereas a benefit corporation is an actual corporate form, And it has this higher level of transparency, accountability, and purpose. It is a legal entity that gives both protection and permission to the board of directors to consider stakeholders other than just the shareholders. Currently, there are 30 states that have adopted benefit corporation legislation, and there's about 14 states that have that pending where they're looking at bringing that in. So it's continuing to move forward. And similar forms also exist in other countries, and other countries are also exploring with bringing this into existence. So why? What's going on with today's consumers that they are demanding and looking forward for this? Well, the Deloitte Millennials report in 2013 showed that young people believe the number one purpose of business is to benefit society. That's a huge swing. That says a lot about millennials. I mean, I think, for those of you who are millennials in here, you're awesome. You're driving this, you're making this real, and you are reigniting the questions that we've grappled with about what is the role of a corporation, what is the role of the directors, why does a corporation exist? But it's just great. So a shout out to all of you. The last 20 years, we've been focused on good products. Consumers have said, okay, I want to make sure it's fair trade, organic. I want, a number of energy efficient, help for the environment. And the next 20 years, we're going to see this focus and trend towards good companies. It's not good enough to now only have a good product. The consumers really want to see that you are a good company. 73% of consumers care about the company and not just the product. And that says a lot as well about where this is going. So why become a certified B Corp? And these are just a few of the reasons that we believe we see companies adopting it. It gives you an ability to benchmark your performance. You have a first questionnaire you fill out. You then, over the years, will continue to benchmark how you perform against that. You have created a way to differentiate yourself from those pretenders, the greenwashing people of the world, because I can tell you Chevron is not going to be a certified B Corp. It looks at your operations as a whole. They may have great programs, but as a whole, they will not rise to this level. And this is a great way for you to attract investors who are also interested in benchmarking their performance in companies that create a social impact. It allows you to show leadership. You can partner with peers, so you know who the community is, and you're able to work with like-minded businesses with the same shared values and missions of yours. And it allows you to attract and engage talent. And that is really an important one that we've noticed. There's some statistics up on the screen about this. The platform that a B Corp certification gives a company to really allow its employees to engage and find more meaning in their work. And this is incredibly important since the satisfaction of your employees creates and drives worker productivity, and it decreases burnout. And, frankly, a lot of people will choose to work for your company, not just compare how much money they're making in one position versus another. But the ability to be engaged in their company is critical. And fortunately, we've got a lot of good companies that have become B Corps. And I'm sure you'll recognize many of those names up here, and you probably have their products. So that is wonderful too. The movement is clearly global. Just a little story. When the B Labs folks decided that they wanted to create a way to basically have a standard so that people could really distinguish themselves. And they started with about 20 companies. And my law firm was one of the initial 20. That wasn't that long ago. And now there are over 1,400 B Corps in 42 countries in 130 industries and growing every day. So it's really incredible to see how this has taken off in a very short period of time. All right, so a benefit corporation. Why would someone become a benefit corporation as opposed to just getting a certification? Benefit corporation basically allows you to bake your mission right into your corporate DNA. And it is you will be putting your purpose of why your company exists into your bylaws. You will be announcing to the world that you are forming as a benefit corporation, and therefore this is who you are and sets you apart. It also gives protection and permission to your board to consider non-financial stakeholders, and those are primarily the community, the environment, the employees, suppliers. It's very interesting, but thanks to the benefit legislation, benefit corp legislation, the environment has become a stakeholder, and it wasn't. The environment was never considered a stakeholder before. So that's just one of those ancillary benefits to this whole movement. It also ensures that the mission can survive over time. Many believe that the role of the corporation is really to promote the interests of the shareholders. And there's been a lot of debate over that. And in the 1960s, or since the 1960s, it was pretty well established that that is the sole purpose and the reason that this corporation exists. And in certain situations, like when you're selling your company, and if there is an auction process, and if there is bidding going on, the law is very clear. Under Revlon, you are required as a board to get the top price, period. There are no other considerations at that point in time. That's all you can do. If you're a benefit corporation, it buys you some time. If you are looking at being acquired and you want to make sure that your mission continues, it allows you to consider those other. This is a very important aspect for so many entrepreneurs who start their company and don't want it to end when they cease being attached to their business. So, what is different about a benefit corporation? First of all, it is a for-profit corporation. It has this expanded purpose, and it explicitly includes a general and specific public benefit. In California, you are required to state in your articles that your purpose includes providing both both social and environmental good. Directors must consider and balance both the purpose and non-financial stakeholder interests when making their decisions. So it's not a choice. It's not up to the directors to consider whether or not it's relevant in a particular situation. This is an underlying premise that has to be followed. And it requires the company to report to owners and the public about how they're performing on those social and environmental milestones. In Delaware, if you're a public benefit corporation, you only have to report every other year currently. In California, you report every year. In Delaware, the directors are able to decide how to benchmark their performance and how to evaluate it. In California, you're required to evaluate your performance based on a third-party, independent third-party standards. And frequently, companies use the B-Lab standards as an opportunity to structure and decide whether or not they're performing as they should. It is currently available in 31 states, and 5 other states are working on bringing benefit corporation legislation to the table. Some misperceptions about benefit corporations. This is what they are not. They are not nonprofits. These are for-profit companies. They're not taxed differently. They're going to be taxed as either a C Corp or an S corporation. No special benefits, unfortunately. They are not required to be audited or certified. So you can be a benefit corporation. You do not need to be certified as a B Corp. And I think a lot of people have that misperception. You are not subject to additional liability. There was a lot of debate at the time that this would open up the boards and the companies to being sued by an environmental group who knew that one of the purposes of the company was to promote their mission. That it's specifically provided in the law that third parties do not have the ability to sue the corporation for failure to deliver on its mission. They can bring an action to require the company to report and to change, but they can't sue the company. So that was a very important aspect of the law. And also, there is not anything that prevents a benefit corporation from going public. I mean, this is something that we've heard for years, especially when we were working on the legislation in California to pass. Laureate is a perfect example of that right now. Currently, there are more than 3,000 companies that have become benefit corporations and over 250 in Delaware. And that might not seem as remarkable as it is, but benefit corporation legislation was first passed in Maryland in 2010. It was passed in California January 1st, 2012. And it was passed in Delaware July 1, 2013. So if you take that and these numbers, start to realize that this is catching fire. This is not a passing trend or a fad. This is real. People are jumping on this bandwagon. And you'll see the names of some of the wonderful companies, including, for instance, PLUM Organics, that was acquired by Campbell Soup and became a benefit corporation as a subsidiary of Campbell Soup Company. So here's just a couple testimonials from Kickstarter, for instance. The chairman of the board of Kickstarter pointed out that there's a huge difference between a values document and the legal foundation of your company. And that's why they became a public benefit corporation. You can have a CSR policy, you can have a strategy, but really making it a part of your company, the foundation upon which you make all your decisions, is the reason that they've become a public benefit corporation. Patagonia, I'm sure everybody knows Patagonia, and they've been a benefit corporation for the last 40 years. They just didn't have a name for themselves. When January 1st, the team from Patagonia was on the steps of the Secretary of State's office in line, making sure that they were the first one to convert to a benefit corporation in California. So it really has, there's some great passion behind this. All right, one of the other criticisms that we heard and concerns that were raised, and even when in 2012, when I was advising startups about should I be a benefit corporation, you know, honestly, had to say, we're not sure what the investors are going to do with this. We don't know if it will be, how it will be accepted. And if you think you're going to be raising capital right now, I'm not sure it's the right thing for you. And I'm a huge fan of this, so it was pretty hard to say that to these clients. But in fact, mainstream venture capital firms are not only supporting their portfolio companies that have elected to become benefit corporations, but there are also benefit corporations that are raising capital from mainstream venture capital investors. And the slide shows you, and this is not all of them, it's just a sampling of some of the ones that we're aware of recently. So a couple of examples of how this has been working on becoming a benefit corporation. So we have ELLO, which was founded in 2013. They raised $5.5 million and announced that they were going to transition to a public benefit corporation. They weren't sure how this would be accepted by their financing partners. And in fact, the transition was embraced, and there's a couple of quotes from their venture partners that signing the ELLO charter was a no-brainer for us as investors. We believe in the mission, and the B Corp status further enforces the manifesto. So this was fantastic news, as you can imagine. Becoming a benefit corporation, Alt School. Alt School was incorporated in Delaware as a C corporation in 2013, and at that time they raised $33 million in a Series A funding. In 2014, they converted to a public benefit corporation. And then in 2015, they raised $100 million. So clearly, benefit corporations are able to raise capital. FARMIGO, this is another one. They were in the middle of raising a $10 million round when they started putting out their intent, testing the waters. Yeah, well, we'd like to become Benefit Corp. You know, we want to become a benefit corporation. And they were concerned. They wanted to see if this would somehow deter their investors. Didn't at all. They raised their $10 million, and they are off and running. COTOPAXI, which is an outdoor gear and apparel brand. They were incorporated in 2013 as a public benefit corporation. They started fundraising. They received no pushback whatsoever, and they raised $3 million in a seed round, and in 2015 raised another $6.5 million. ALLIANT, this is very interesting. So ALLIANT was a nonprofit, large university, international, and we actually handled this one, so it's near and dear to our hearts. But in 2015, they were converted from a nonprofit to a benefit corporation. And the way this really happened is Bertelsmann had a fund which was focused on education and raising money for education. They came to us and said, we want to convert this to a benefit corporation. We will acquire a controlling interest in the company, then would be a company, as opposed to the nonprofit. And as a matter of fact, our VC fund is going to go out and we have earmarked $564 million to do acquisitions similar to this. And in fact, all of the universities that we acquire are going to become benefit corporations. So you can see again a trend, a blurring of nonprofits, for-profits, and what's happening. PLUM Organics, I mentioned earlier, was acquired by Campbell Soup in June of 2013. And again, asked Campbell Soup, we'd like to maintain our mission, and we are the #1 brand of organic baby food. We think it's important to be genuine. We want to become a benefit corporation. Campbell Soup allowed them to, and there's a quote here from their VP of Corporate Affairs that says, frankly, I kind of like being the only publicly held owner of a Delaware public benefit corporation. It's a great story for us to tell, but it's a model that a lot of others could follow. So, you know, it again shows a little bit of the trend that's occurring and the acceptance, even by the Fortune 500 companies. I want to mention just a couple of recent items that have been occurring in the news, and one of them is very significant. This happened, the Department of Labor clarified its guidance on economically targeted investments, ETIs, on October 22nd. It's just a few weeks ago. And this is significant because plan fiduciaries control a lot of money. And traditionally, they have stayed away from investing in companies that have a mission or collateral benefits. The duty of a plan fiduciary is to have maximize returns and minimize risk. The Department of Labor came out on October 22nd to clarify its guidance because they felt that their previous guidance was creating a chilling effect on plan fiduciaries investing in impact companies. And they, at that time, basically said that you can't take a lower return, you can't take a higher risk, but if it comes down to a tiebreaker between two companies or two investments, you can absolutely use this as the tiebreaker. And in a lot of ways, this is just a game changer for this space. It's huge. PepsiCo announced that its environmental sustainability programs have saved the company more than $375 million since it started in 2010. And press like this passing this time, with the passing of time, it's allowing us to create the case for the credibility of benefit corporations and their value proposition, as well as their ability to scale impact. ADIDAS has now introduced a 3-year research program where they're going to develop soccer cleats that can be recycled, that don't use chemical additives and create no waste. And they're partnering with other for-profit entities to come up with this project and product that has a benefit to many, many sectors. And a fun fact, this is so that I just don't know if you're all paying attention any longer, but I want to make sure you are. This is something you can use at your next cocktail party. Guarantee you, it'll be a hit. I know, kind of sad, isn't it? But of the firms in the U.S., the companies that are run by CEOs that have daughters spend 13% more on CSR than companies with CSR. Companies with CEOs that don't have daughters. So if you can say it better than I did, then you'll be great at the cocktail party. And I guess the last thing that I want to really point out is that millennials care. I mean, that's what's reignited all of this. That's where this concern that, it didn't work before. It didn't work for everyone. And we can use the power of business. We can leverage the power of business to create good in the world. Millennials are universally more engaged in CSR efforts. 9 in 10 of you would switch brands to one associated with a cause. So, I'll take questions, but remember to always do well by doing good.
Thank you, Teresa. So as promised, I'm going to start us off. And when you do ask questions, if I can get to you, I'm going to bring the mic to you. If you're too far away in the hinterland, then I will repeat your questions since we're videotaping this. So just to start off, one little known fact to me, which one of my students brought up, is that if you're B-Lab certified, you have to convert to being a benefit corporation in a certain period of time. I think it's within 5 years. Why wouldn't you just start as a benefit corporation then?
Good question. One of the main reasons is that you may not be able to. I gave the example that our law firm, which is a limited liability partnership, is B certified. We cannot be a benefit corporation. We will never be a benefit corporation. We don't have that option. So to clarify the point, they are requiring that corporations convert to a benefit corporation in states where that legislation has been adopted. And it's 5 years from the date of adoption. So in California, by 2017, so the end of 2016, if you became a benefit corporation, a B certified corporation, you have to convert to a benefit corporation. And the other is that sometimes companies just want to test the water. They want to decide, is this something that I really want to do? Can we do this? Can we make a profit and maintain a mission. And it is not as big a commitment as it is to incorporate as a benefit corporation.
So if you're already a well-established, even publicly traded company, wouldn't that be difficult to convert to being a benefit corporation? You need, I think we spoke yesterday, 2/3 shareholder vote to do that. So,
Right.
I think in quoting Dave Stangus, who you referenced on the slides, who I sat on the board with the net impact, he mentioned that Campbell's felt that they would qualify, but it's almost onerous for them as a corporation to become a benefit corporation. And if there's a 5-year period for BLAP certification, to go through all that effort and then lose your certification could have some negative consequences in the consumer market that may not understand the reason why.
Correct. And there, we don't know right now. This is such a new area, obviously. We don't know if there will be a different certification that gets developed for companies like a Campbell Soup that has subsidiaries that are certified. And PLUM Organics can be a certified B Corp and is. So we don't know, and it's not really one size fits all. So we'll have to see how it evolves.
So are there other questions? I can open this up. Let me start with Akshat.
I am Akshat. I am an MBA student and also in Professor Walske's class. So one thing I'm very unclear about, so B corporations can protect them. So when you become a B corporation, you can be protected from lawsuits from shareholders if you invest in CSR activities. But does it apply to, like, if you get acquired by some companies which are not in CSR and are like larger companies? And my second question to you would be, like, how to balance CSR and profit making?
Okay. I'm not sure I understood exactly the first question.
Well, let me expand on that a little bit. I think I know where Akshat's going to this. If you look at the some of the cases, Disney and other precedent-setting cases, boards have a lot of latitude in the decisions they made. Is it necessary to be a benefit corporation outside of the scenario of being sold the highest bidder, or can you kind of enforce this as a corporation even without being BLAB certified or benefit corporation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, boards do have business judgment rule, which is meant to protect boards against making mistakes. So then the question is, but are you supposed to be? Was it a mistake to consider those other stakeholders? And the Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court wrote an article, and he said, it's pretty well established. If you're a corporation, your job and your commitment is to your shareholders to develop and deliver shareholder value. If you want to consider other items, you want to consider collateral stakeholders, then use one of these new forms and become a benefit corporation. And he started out as completely anti-benefit corporation. And then he came around and said, well, this is the way to do it. You want to be protected, you want to do it. So that when he talks, people in the corporate world listen. It carries a lot of weight. So his article that he came out with was, I think, something that a lot of us are turning to as a good reason for us to do this.
So my name is Luis Arrocha. I'm with the Master Public Administration program. My background has been in nonprofit and the public sector. I currently work for the District Attorney's Office. And so we've been huge around human trafficking, sweatshops, and just kind of corporate greed. And then I seen Adidas, and I remember the history of Adidas and Nikes having these huge sweatshops. And understanding how consumers feel about today about buying product and making sure that it represents our morals and our ethics. Is this another way that they're converting to disguise their history and not going into this kind of public benefit corporation saying, we're doing good now, that was our history from the past, now buy our product. And we're generating the same revenue, the same money, but now we're on this side, we're no longer on this side. Do you see that happening with this new kind of consumer demographic changing the way they look at product?
Whether or not I don't know if I see it because I'm not, studying each of those corporations. But I will say that ways to distinguish yourself, for instance, a B certification, it looks at the company as a whole. So great that you're doing this policy, but how do you treat your employees? You know, what are you doing about your supply chain? You know, what are you really doing in terms of environmental hazards? And how are you working to make a good, positive impact? I don't know that they would be certified. Benefit corporation, they're going to be required to report every year if they're in California, or twice a year, or every other year if you're in Delaware. And the public's going to see, public and shareholders, what are they doing? How are they doing it? And as I think I mentioned, as the stock exchanges get on board with this, as other countries get on board with this, it's going to be more and more difficult to be a pretender.
Hi, Marco Davanti, professor in nonprofit administration. Other states have passed, in addition to the B Corp, also legislation for the low-profit limited liability company, or the so-called L3C. Can you comment on that and why California is not passing such a law?
Yeah, yes, there are a lot of states that have passed that. And, you know, so I got to tell you what I think personally is that I don't know why we need it. If I form a limited liability company, I can do whatever I want. I can put anything I want in my operating agreement and put it right out there. So I'm not really sure why you need legislation to do it. That's, I believe, one of the reasons that we don't have it in California is that most of us aren't really sure there's a need for it, because you can have that by just forming one today.
Hi, my name is Bakr Ali. I'm with the MBA full-time. My question is, you talked about the benefit the corporations they get from this program, the benefit corporation. But you didn't talk about the impacts they have on societies and employees. And you mentioned they're gonna report every year, some of them once in 2 years. How to make sure these reports are correct? Because from what we've seen and we studied in our class, there've been fraud, and even with auditors, like, and you mentioned there's no auditors, right? So how to make sure the rules and regulations are implemented and they're not manipulated. These reports are not manipulated by those corporations. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great point. I think I mentioned that in California, you are required to report against and evaluate your performance against an independent third-party standard. So hopefully you aren't just making it up as you go along. In Delaware, the board can create their own standards and report on those. So I think there's more opportunity for faking it in Delaware than there is in a state like California. And it's going to depend on which state. And I think that consumers, you know, I just look at what has gone on and how consumers have driven this trend so far. I think they're not stupid. They'll figure it out. And there'll be bad companies. There always will be.
Hi, I am Esther, part of the MPA program. And in terms of contracting, do governments take the B Corp status into consideration when awarding these contracts? And if not, how do we encourage that?
Oh, that's so great. I know, we wish. Federal government, I'm not aware of anything. I know that San Francisco has passed legislation. I think that they give B certified companies, maybe it's benefit corporations, I'm not exactly sure, but when they submit, pardon me? Is it? Yeah, they give them a preference. So yes, San Francisco, of course, it would be San Francisco that's done that. It which is fantastic. And hopefully that there's, I so believe that to create this kind of impact, it can't be just driven by the private sector. That's why I believe legislation is important. And the more that we can get everybody on the same page with the proposition that we want to use business as an opportunity to leverage and do good and support that, it'll just increase the impact.
Okay, my question is, if you're a nonprofit and you're looking to, if you're a nonprofit and you're considering converting to a benefit corporation, besides the stamp of being a benefit corporation or a B Corp, what's the incentive if they lose nonprofit-related tax benefits and have to kind of file more reporting along with benefit corporations? So could you comment on that?
Sure. So there's a lot, there's no one size fits all, okay? So you can have a number of different structures. You can have a nonprofit, you can have a for-profit, you can have what I call the benefit corporation the hybrid, because you've got mission and impact and your for-profit. And then there's tandem corporations, tandem situations. So you may have a parent company that's a nonprofit owning a for-profit. It can't go the other way. You just need, it needs to go that way. Or tandem, brother-sister entities with some overlaps of purpose primarily. You got to be careful about the tax rules and UBTI and control issues and self-dealing if you're dealing with private foundations versus public charities, and how those relate to the for-profit and the nonprofit. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
So, yeah, I just want to repeat that for the video. So, to what extent can nonprofits be engaged in commercial activities? And this question comes up because I know some for-profits or nonprofits that generate a lot of their revenue and are self-sustaining, and others feel like they can't go above a certain threshold.
Yeah, and I, right off the bat, disclaimer, I'm not an expert on nonprofits, and it could be a very long discussion. I do represent some, so I would say that you probably have to look at what are your objectives and where do you want to gain most of your revenues, and are you going to go out and raise capital, or are you going to get grants? I frequently have had nonprofits, people come in, they want to start a nonprofit, and they want to go get VC financing. Well, that doesn't work. You tell the VC you're going to get no profit. That's not their model. So are you doing that? Is that your objective? Or do you really believe that you're going to get a greater amount of your capital from grants, from government programs, from donations? I think those are the two things that you need to take a look at in deciding whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. If you're a nonprofit, you can generate income, but it has to be aligned with your purpose. That's it. Very much directed on that.
Hello? Hi. With B certification and B Corps, like how you say, there's obviously a problem in the system, and the certification attempts to address it, but you also say that, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. So my question is, at the end of the day, what would you say would be the perfect balance? Would you think everyone would have a sort of B certification, or can harmony be achieved between nonprofits, for-profits, and benefit corporations?
I absolutely believe harmony can be achieved between all of them. And I think that it really depends on what they're doing. And like I said, how they plan to raise their capital. What is their vision for their future? We represent benefit corporations who have no interest in being a certified B corporation. We have certified B Corps that have no interest in becoming a benefit corporation. And then we represent both. So and we represent plenty of nonprofits that are doing amazing work. But it's competition for funds. And what is your value proposition? What is your mission? And how will it best be achieved? And that's a conversation that I sit down and have every time an entrepreneur walks into the office and is looking for counseling on what structure to use going forward. And it may change over time. Your business model may change.
So with that, we are out of time, and I just want to thank Teresa on behalf of the university for coming today. It's a little alumni gift, as Teresa is an alumni as well. And I think, can we all give a round of applause for